Part 1. The Challenge. The crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the Grand Metropolitan Hotel's ballroom. Women in designer gowns moved like graceful swans between men in expensive tuxedos. The charity gala was in full swing, and everyone who mattered in the city was there. Isabella Romano adjusted her diamond necklace and surveyed the room with sharp eyes. At 28, she was one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Her family owned the biggest luxury hotel chain on the East Coast. Tonight, like every night, she was the center of attention. "Darling, you look absolutely stunning," gushed her friend Monica, air-kissing both of Isabella's cheeks. "That dress must have cost more than most people make in a year." Isabella smiled coldly. Only the best, as always. She loved how people looked at her with a mixture of admiration and envy. Money gave her power, and power made her feel alive. The soft sound of violin music drifted through the air. Isabella barely noticed at first. Background music was just that, background. But then something made her pause. The melody was different. It wasn't the usual boring classical pieces they always played at these events. She turned toward the sound and saw him. A young man stood near the corner of the ballroom, completely absorbed in playing his violin. He wore a simple black suit that looked like it came from a regular store, not some fancy designer. His dark hair fell slightly over his eyes as he moved with his music. "Who is that?" Isabella asked Monica, pointing with her champagne glass. "Oh, him? That's just the musician they hired for tonight. I heard he plays on the streets usually. They probably got him cheap." Isabella raised an eyebrow. A street musician at her family's charity gala? How amusing. The young man's music was beautiful, she had to admit. It told a story without words. She could hear longing and hope in every note. For a moment, she almost felt something stir inside her chest. Almost. But then she remembered who she was. Isabella Romano didn't get moved by street musicians. "This should be fun," she whispered to Monica, a wicked smile spreading across her lips. She walked toward the musician, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. Her friends followed behind her like a pack of curious wolves. Other guests began to notice and turned to watch. The young man finished his piece and lowered his violin. He looked up and saw Isabella approaching. His eyes were kind but tired, like someone who had seen too much of life's harsh side. "That was quite lovely," Isabella said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Her voice dripped with fake sweetness. "You play very well for a street performer." The musician nodded politely. "Thank you. I'm honored to play at such an important event." Isabella laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, you're honored? How sweet." She stepped closer, enjoying the growing audience. "You know, I have an idea. A little game." She raised her voice so more people could hear. The ballroom began to quiet as guests sensed drama brewing. "You think you're quite talented, don't you?" Isabella continued. "Well, here's what I propose. If you can play something that actually moves me to tears, real tears, mind you, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted in shocked laughter. Someone gasped. Another person said, "Oh my God," under their breath. Cell phones appeared as people started recording. "Isabella, you're terrible." Monica giggled, already posting on social media. "Can you imagine?" laughed another friend. "A Romano marrying a street musician? That's the joke of the century." Isabella basked in the attention. This was exactly the kind of entertainment she lived for. She loved watching people squirm, especially those beneath her social level. But the musician didn't squirm. He didn't look embarrassed or angry. He simply stood there, holding his violin, looking directly into Isabella's eyes. "You're serious?" he asked quietly. "Completely serious," Isabella replied, her smile growing wider. "But don't get your hopes up, darling. I don't cry, ever. My heart is made of stone, as they say." The crowd laughed again, but the musician kept staring at her. There was something in his gaze that made Isabella feel slightly uncomfortable. It wasn't the look of a desperate man grasping at an impossible chance. It was the look of someone who saw right through her. "All right," he said simply. "I accept your challenge," Isabella blinked. That wasn't the response she expected. She thought he would either run away in shame or beg for mercy. She certainly didn't expect him to take her seriously. "I'm sorry, what?" she stammered. "I said I accept. Give me 1 month to prepare. I'll return and play for you. If my music moves you to tears, you keep your word." The ballroom fell silent. Even Isabella's friends stopped laughing. This wasn't going according to plan. You can't be serious, Isabella said, trying to regain control of the situation. This is just a joke. A bit of fun. The musician tucked his violin under his arm. Maybe it started as a joke for you, but music has always been serious to me. A month from today, I'll be back. He started to walk away, then turned back one more time. Oh, and Miss Romano, you're wrong about one thing. Everyone can cry. Even people who think they're made of stone. Sometimes they just need the right song to remember they're human. With that, he walked out of the ballroom, leaving Isabella standing there with her mouth open. The crowd began to buzz with excited chatter. This was better than any soap opera. Did that really just happen? Monica asked, still holding up her phone. This is going to get millions of views. Isabella watched the musician disappear through the ballroom doors. For the first time in years, someone had surprised her. She didn't like being surprised. Post it everywhere, she told Monica. Make sure everyone sees what a fool he's making of himself. A street musician thinking he can make Isabella Romano cry? This is going to be hilarious. But as her friends laughed and shared the video, Isabella felt something strange, a tiny flutter in her stomach. Was it excitement? Nervousness? She couldn't tell. She hadn't felt anything like it in a very long time. She pushed the feeling away and grabbed another glass of champagne. This was just entertainment. In a month, the poor musician would return, play his little song, fail miserably and disappear forever. She would have her laugh and life would go back to normal. At least, that's what she told herself. But deep down, in a place she didn't like to visit, Isabella Romano felt the first crack in the wall she had built around her heart. And it scared her more than she wanted to admit. The video of the challenge spread across social media like wildfire. By morning, Tarastu Street Musician Challenge was trending worldwide. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Isabella woke up to thousands of notifications on her phone. The story had been picked up by news outlets, gossip blogs, and talk shows. Her publicist was having a meltdown. This is either going to be great publicity or a complete disaster, her assistant warned during their morning meeting. Isabella just smiled. She thrived on attention, good or bad. Let the world watch. In 30 days, they would all see what happened when someone tried to challenge Isabella Romano. What she didn't know was that somewhere across the city, in a small apartment above a coffee shop, a young musician was already preparing for the most important performance of his life, and he had no intention of failing. Part 2. The Unexpected Response. 3 days had passed since the charity gala, and Isabella couldn't escape the story. Every morning brought new headlines. Millionairess challenges street musician. The most expensive marriage bet in history. Will love conquer money? Isabella sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of Romano Tower, staring at her laptop screen. The video had been viewed over 50 million times. News shows were discussing it. Late-night comedians were making jokes about it. Even her own mother had called from Italy asking if she had lost her mind. This is getting out of hand, she muttered, scrolling through the comments. Most people were calling her cruel and heartless. Others were cheering for the mysterious musician. A few were even placing bets on the outcome. Her assistant knocked and entered. Miss Romano, you have 3 interview requests from major networks, and someone from Hollywood called about movie rights. Isabella waved her hand dismissively. Decline them all. This will blow over in a week when people find something new to gossip about. But it didn't blow over. If anything, it got bigger. Meanwhile, across town, the musician whose real name was David walked into the subway station where he usually played. Word had spread about who he was, and a small crowd was already waiting for him. David! David! Called out a teenage girl with her phone ready. Are you really going to try to make Isabella Romano cry? David smiled and set up his violin case. I'm going to play music. That's what I do. But everyone's saying it's impossible, said an older man in a business suit. That woman doesn't have a heart. Everyone has a heart, David replied, tuning his violin. Sometimes it just gets buried under other things. He began to play and the crowd grew quiet. People stopped rushing to catch their trains and listened. His music filled the underground space with warmth and hope. When he finished, the case at his feet was filled with more money than he usually made in a week. Good luck, man, called out a construction worker as he dropped in a $20 bill. Show that rich lady what real music sounds like. David packed up his violin and walked to his next spot. This had been his routine for 3 years now, ever since his family lost everything. His father's business had collapsed. taking their savings, their house, and their reputation with it. David had to drop out of music school and find a way to survive on his own. Playing on the streets wasn't what he had dreamed of, but it was honest work. He brought joy to people's lives, made them smile during their busy days, helped them feel less alone. That meant something. Back in her office, Isabella found herself checking social media every few minutes. She told herself she was just monitoring the situation, but the truth was more complicated. She was looking for updates about David. Someone had found his regular performance spots and posted a schedule online. Videos of his street performances were going viral too. Isabella watched them with growing fascination. In one video, David was playing outside a children's hospital. Through the windows, sick kids were pressing their faces to the glass, smiling and clapping. In another, he was in a park where an elderly woman was crying. His music seemed to comfort her, and by the end of the song, she was smiling through her tears. He actually made someone cry, Isabella whispered to herself, then immediately felt annoyed. Those were just random people, not her. She was different, stronger, colder. Her phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "Girl, you need to see this. Your street musician is becoming a celebrity." Isabella clicked the link Monica sent. It was a news article titled, "The Musician Who Believes in Miracles." The reporter had tracked down David and interviewed him. "I don't see this as a bet or a challenge," David was quoted as saying. "I see it as an opportunity to share something beautiful with someone who might need it. Music has the power to heal, to open hearts, to remind us of our humanity. If Miss Romano has forgotten that she's human, maybe the right song can help her remember." Isabella slammed her laptop shut. How dare he psychoanalyze her? He didn't know anything about her or her life. She was perfectly human, thank you very much. She just didn't have time for silly emotions and bleeding heart sentimentality. But that night, lying in her king-sized bed in her penthouse apartment, Isabella couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about David's words. She also couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her at the gala. Not with fear or greed or desperation, but with something else. Pity, understanding. That annoyed her even more. The next morning brought more surprises. Her doorman handed her a letter with her morning mail. Her name was written on the envelope in careful handwriting. Inside was a simple note. "Dear Miss Romano, I wanted you to know that I'm taking our agreement seriously. I'll be spending the next few weeks preparing something special for you. I hope when the time comes, you'll listen with an open heart. Respectfully, David." Isabella read the note 3 times. No one had called her Miss Romano with such genuine respect in years. People either feared her, wanted something from her, or tried to impress her. This was different. She crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. Then 5 minutes later, she fished it out and smoothed it flat again. Over the following weeks, David's story continued to grow. A local news station did a feature on him, showing his tiny apartment above a coffee shop. The furniture was secondhand, but the walls were covered with sheet music he had written. His violin was old but well cared for, like a treasured friend. "Music saved my life," he told the interviewer. "When everything else fell apart, when I lost my family's money and respect, music was still there. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It just cares if you're honest." Isabella watched the interview from her office. She learned that David donated half of his earnings to local charities. He taught free music lessons to kids who couldn't afford them. He volunteered at nursing homes playing for people who rarely had visitors. "Why do you do all this?" the interviewer asked. David smiled. "Because when you have nothing left except your talent and your heart, you realize those might be the most valuable things of all." Isabella turned off the video feeling strangely unsettled. When was the last time she had done something for someone else without expecting anything in return? When was the last time she had used her wealth to truly help people? Not just for tax breaks or good publicity. She pushed those thoughts away. David was just trying to look good for the cameras. No one was really that selfless. He probably saw this whole thing as his ticket to fame and fortune, but doubt was creeping in like water through a crack in a dam. 2 weeks into the month, Isabella did something she had never done before. She put on jeans, a plain t-shirt, and sunglasses, and took the subway to one of David's performance spots. She stood at the back of the crowd that had gathered to hear him play in Washington Square Park. There were dozens of people there. Families, couples, tourists, homeless individuals, business people on their lunch breaks, all united by the music flowing from David's violin. Isabella watched as David noticed an old homeless man sitting alone on a bench. Without stopping his performance, David moved closer to the man, playing directly for him. The man's weathered face lit up with joy and tears rolled down his cheeks. When the song ended, David walked over and gave the man half the money from his violin case. They talked for a few minutes, and Isabella could see David writing something down. Later, she would learn he was getting the man's information to help him find housing. Isabella felt something strange happening in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. For just a moment, she understood why people were crying during David's performances. Then she caught herself and hurried away. This was ridiculous. She was Isabella Romano. She didn't get emotional over street musicians and homeless people. She had an image to maintain, a business to run, a reputation to protect. But that night, she donated anonymously to 3 homeless shelters. She told herself it was just good business, a tax write-off. Nothing more. With 1 week left until David's promised return, Isabella found herself thinking about him constantly. She had stopped reading the articles and watching the videos, but she couldn't stop wondering what he was planning. Her friends were getting excited about the upcoming show. They were planning viewing parties and making bets. Isabella played along, but inside she was feeling something she couldn't name. Was it nervousness? Fear? Anticipation? Whatever it was, Isabella Romano didn't like it one bit. She was used to being in control, knowing the outcome before the game even started. But for the first time in her life, she was facing something completely unpredictable. And despite herself, she was beginning to look forward to it. Part 3. Unexpected depths. Isabella couldn't focus on work. It was Thursday morning, exactly 1 week before David was supposed to return, and she had been staring at the same contract for 20 minutes without reading a single word. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The hashtag for Street Musician Challenge was still trending. People from around the world were sharing their own stories about music that had moved them to tears. Some were even playing their own instruments in parks and posting videos calling it the David Challenge. This is insane, Isabella muttered, finally giving up on the contract. She walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the city below. Somewhere down there, David was preparing for next Thursday. What was he planning? What could possibly make her cry? She had cried exactly 3 times in her adult life. Once when her grandfather died. Once when she was 21 and had food poisoning so bad she thought she might die. And once when she was 25 and her first serious boyfriend had cheated on her with her best friend. That was it. 3 times in 10 years. She wasn't an emotional person. She was practical, logical, controlled. Her assistant buzzed in. "Miss Romano, your mother is on line 1. Isabella sighed and picked up the phone. "Ciao, Mama." "Isabella, cara mia, what is this craziness I keep reading about?" Her mother's Italian accent was thick with concern. "A street musician, really?" "It's nothing, Mama, just a silly bet. It'll be over next week and forgotten by Christmas. But Bella, I saw the videos of this boy playing. He has a gift, and more importantly, he has a kind heart. When was the last time you met a man who wasn't interested in your money?" Isabella rolled her eyes. "He's not interested in me, Mama. He's interested in making a fool of me in front of the whole world." "Is he? Or are you afraid he might actually succeed?" The question hung in the air long after Isabella ended the call. Afraid? Isabella Romano wasn't afraid of anything, especially not some street musician with a violin. That afternoon, against her better judgment, Isabella found herself back in disguise, this time at the subway station where David often played during rush hour. She wore a baseball cap pulled low and stood behind a pillar where she could watch without being seen. David was there, just as she expected. But today was different. Instead of just playing for tips, he was teaching a young girl how to hold a violin. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and she was clearly just learning. "Like this?" the girl asked, struggling to position her fingers correctly. "Almost," David said patiently. "Remember, the violin is your friend. You don't want to squeeze too tight or you'll hurt your friend's feelings." The girl giggled and tried again. This time she managed to produce a clear, sweet note. "I did it," she exclaimed. "You sure did," David smiled. "You're a natural. Same time next week?" The girl nodded enthusiastically and ran back to her mother, who was waiting nearby. Isabella noticed the woman press a $20 bill into David's hand, but he gently pushed it back. "The lesson was free," he said. Just promise me she'll keep practicing. Isabella watched this exchange with growing confusion. If David was just trying to get famous or make money from this whole situation, why was he giving away free lessons? Why was he turning down payment? More people gathered as David began his evening performance. Isabella recognized some faces from previous days, regular commuters who had started timing their trips to catch his music. There was the businesswoman who always looked stressed until David's music helped her relax, the construction worker who hummed along to every song, the elderly man who said the music reminded him of his late wife. David knew them all. He made eye contact, smiled at them, played songs he knew they enjoyed. This wasn't just a job for him. These people had become his community, his audience, his friends. As Isabella watched, she began to understand something that made her very uncomfortable. David wasn't performing for money or fame. He was performing because he genuinely cared about bringing joy to people's lives. When had Isabella last cared about anyone's happiness besides her own? The thought hit her like a punch to the stomach. She stumbled backward and bumped into someone. "Excuse me," she mumbled, not looking up. "No problem," said a warm voice. "Great music tonight, isn't it?" Isabella glanced up and saw a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Yes," she found herself saying. "It's beautiful." "He's been playing here for months," the woman continued. "My daughter takes piano lessons, but she was getting discouraged. Then she heard David play and it inspired her to keep going. He's got a real gift for touching hearts." Isabella nodded and hurried away before the woman could say anything else. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to think. Walking through the city streets, Isabella found herself really looking at things for the first time in years. She saw the homeless man David had helped, now clean and wearing new clothes, talking to a social worker. She saw children playing in a park where someone had organized free music lessons. She saw people everywhere who seemed to be inspired by kindness, by art, by the simple act of caring. When had her world become so small? When had she stopped noticing anyone except herself and her wealthy friends? That night, Isabella couldn't sleep again. She found herself researching David online, but not for gossip this time. She wanted to understand who he really was. She discovered that he had graduated at the top of his class from the prestigious Berklee College of Music. He had been accepted to perform with several major orchestras. His professors had called him a once-in-a-generation talent. Then she found the news articles about his family's business collapse. His father had owned a successful import company until a partner stole everything and disappeared. The family lost their home, their savings, everything. David had to leave school and find work to help support his parents. Instead of being bitter, instead of giving up on music entirely, David had found a way to keep his passion alive while helping others. He played on the streets not because he had to, but because he chose to. Because he believed music could make the world a little better, one song at a time. Isabella closed her laptop and stared at the ceiling. She tried to imagine what she would have done in David's situation. Would she have been so graceful? So generous? So optimistic? She knew the answer and she didn't like it. Friday came and went. Saturday, Sunday. Each day, Isabella found new excuses to go where David might be playing. She told herself she was gathering intelligence, preparing for Thursday. But really, she was trying to understand this person who had somehow gotten under her skin. On Monday, she witnessed something that shook her even more. David was playing in a park when it started to rain. Most performers would have packed up and left. But David noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench, clearly upset about something. Instead of leaving, David moved under a nearby tree and kept playing. The music seemed to comfort the woman. After a few minutes, she approached him. "Thank you," Isabella heard her say. "Today would have been my wedding anniversary. 50 years. My husband passed last month and I didn't know how I was going to get through today." David stopped playing and listened as the woman talked about her husband, their life together, their love of music. When she finished, David played the most beautiful, gentle melody Isabella had ever heard. It was somehow both sad and hopeful, acknowledging loss while celebrating love. The woman cried, but they were healing tears. When David finished, she hugged him and walked away with a lighter step. Isabella stood there in the rain, watching this act of pure human kindness, and felt something crack inside her chest. For the first time in years, she understood what it meant to be moved by something beyond money or power or social status. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice David packing up his violin until he was walking directly toward her. "Isabella?" he said softly. She froze. She was caught. Her disguise was useless this close-up. "I thought that might be you," David continued. "I've seen you at a few of my performances this week." Isabella's face burned with embarrassment. I wanted to." "It's okay," David said. "I'm glad you came. Would you like to get some coffee? There's a nice place across the street." Isabella looked around frantically as if her security team or personal assistant might magically appear to rescue her from this situation. But she was alone, disguised as a regular person, face to face with the man she had publicly humiliated. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "Why not? Because you're Isabella Romano and I'm just a street musician? Or because you're afraid people might see you being human?" The question stung because it was true. Isabella had spent so many years building walls around herself that she had forgotten how to simply talk to another person. "Fine," she said. "Coffee, but just for a few minutes." The coffee shop was small and warm, full of the kind of people Isabella usually never interacted with. Students, artists, workers on their break. David ordered 2 regular coffees and led her to a corner table. "Why do you do it?" Isabella found herself asking. "The street performing, I mean. You could probably get a job with an orchestra or a music school." David stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I did try that route. After my family lost everything, I auditioned for several orchestras. But they wanted someone with the right connections, the right background. Street musician wasn't exactly the image they were looking for." Part 4. The performance Thursday arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October wind that cuts right through your jacket. Isabella spent the entire day trying to focus on work, but every few minutes she found herself checking the time, 4 p.m. She had told herself she wouldn't go. This whole thing had gotten out of hand. The smart thing to do would be to stay home, let David play to an empty park, and end this ridiculous circus once and for all. But at 6:30, she found herself putting on jeans and a warm coat. Washington Square Park was buzzing with activity when Isabella arrived at 10 minutes to 7. Word had spread online about the final performance and hundreds of people had gathered. News crews were setting up cameras. Street vendors were selling hot chocolate and pretzels. Someone had even printed t-shirts that said, "Team David" and "Team Isabella." Isabella pulled her hood up and tried to blend into the crowd. She spotted her friends Monica and Rachel near the front, both of them live streaming on their phones. They had no idea she was there. "This is so crazy," she heard Monica telling her followers. "Like, can you imagine if he actually makes her cry? Isabella Romano crying in public? That would break the internet." Isabella cringed. Is that really how people saw her? As someone so cold that her tears would be worth millions of views? At exactly 7 o'clock, David appeared. He walked through the crowd carrying his violin case, and people began to cheer and clap. He looked calm, focused like a professional athlete before a big game. He set up in the center of the park's small performance area. Someone had brought a microphone and small speakers so everyone could hear. David tested it, then looked out at the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying across the park. "A month ago, I made a promise to someone. Tonight, I'm here to keep that promise." His eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, Isabella thought he saw her. But he didn't call her out or ask her to come forward. He simply opened his violin case and began to prepare. "Before I play," David continued, "I want to say something about music. Music isn't about winning or losing. It's not about proving points or settling bets. Music is about connection. It's about reminding us that underneath all our differences, rich or poor, famous or unknown, we're all human beings trying to find our way in the world." He lifted his violin and positioned it under his chin. "This song is called 'The Heart Remembers.' It's something I wrote this past month, and it's dedicated to anyone who has ever felt lost or forgotten what it means to feel." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. How did he know? How did he know that was exactly what she had been feeling? David drew his bow across the strings, and the first note floated into the evening air. The melody began soft and hesitant, like someone waking up from a long sleep. Isabella recognized it immediately. It was the feeling of being a child and waking up on Christmas morning full of wonder and possibility. But then the music changed. It became sharper, more urgent. Isabella could hear ambition in it, the drive to succeed, to climb higher, to want more. The melody grew complicated, layered, impressive, but somehow exhausting. As the music continued, Isabella began to understand that David was telling a story. Her story. The melody shifted again, becoming cold and precise. This was the sound of success without joy, of winning without happiness. It was beautiful in its technical perfection, but somehow empty. Isabella felt her chest tighten as she recognized herself in those notes. Around her, the crowd was completely silent. Even the news cameras had stopped moving. Everyone was caught in the spell of David's music. Then something unexpected happened. The cold, perfect melody began to crack. Small, vulnerable notes started to creep in. Moments of doubt, flashes of loneliness, brief glimpses of the person hiding underneath all that armor. Isabella's hands began to shake. This was impossible. How could David know about the nights she lay awake feeling empty despite all her success? How could he know about the moments when she wondered if anyone would care if she simply disappeared? The music grew more intense, more emotional. David was no longer just playing. He was pouring his heart out through his violin. The melody became a conversation between the cold, successful Isabella and the scared, lonely person she tried so hard to hide. And then, just when Isabella thought she couldn't take any more, the music changed one final time. It became warm, gentle, forgiving. David was playing the sound of someone learning to love themselves. The sound of walls coming down, of hearts opening, of humans remembering how to feel. It was the musical equivalent of a hug, of someone saying, "It's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to care, it's okay to be human." Isabella felt something she hadn't felt in years. Tears were building behind her eyes, and she couldn't stop them. The melody soared higher, more beautiful than anything she had ever heard. It was hope and love and possibility all wrapped into one perfect song. It was the sound of second chances and new beginnings. And then David did something that broke Isabella's heart in the most beautiful way possible. He began to play a lullaby. It was simple and sweet, the kind of song a mother might sing to comfort a frightened child, but Isabella heard something else in it. It was the lullaby she had hummed to herself as a little girl when she was scared or sad. A melody she had forgotten for 20 years, buried under layers of ambition and armor. How could he possibly know that song? How could he know the one piece of music that connected her to the innocent child she used to be? The tears came then, slow at first, then faster. Isabella tried to stop them, tried to maintain control, but it was impossible. David's music had found every crack in her defenses and opened her heart completely. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because for the first time in years she felt truly alive. She was crying for the lonely child she had been, for the dreams she had given up, for all the times she had chosen success over happiness. But most of all, she was crying because David's music had shown her something she thought she had lost forever. The ability to feel deeply, to care about something beyond money and power, to remember what it meant to be human. Around her, other people were crying too. The businessman who had been recording on his phone had forgotten about it entirely and was wiping tears from his eyes. The teenage girls who had come to watch the drama were holding each other and sobbing. Even some of the news reporters looked emotional. David played the lullaby once more, even softer this time, and then let the final note fade into the evening air. The park was completely silent. David lowered his violin and looked directly at Isabella. Somehow, despite the crowd of hundreds, his eyes found hers immediately. "Isabella," he said softly into the microphone. "You're crying." The entire crowd turned to look at her. Isabella realized her hood had fallen back and everyone could see her face streaked with tears. Cameras were pointed at her. Phones were recording. In a few minutes, the whole world would see Isabella Romano vulnerable and broken open. And for the first time in her life, she didn't care. Isabella started walking toward David, pushing through the crowd. People stepped aside to let her pass, their expressions ranging from shock to admiration to simple human sympathy. When she reached the center of the performance area, she stood face to face with David. Up close, she could see that his eyes were damp too. "You did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You made me remember." "Remember what?" "That I'm human. That I'm not made of stone. That somewhere inside all this armor there's still a person who can feel." David smiled, the kind of smile that could light up the darkest room. I never doubted it for a second. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People were crying, laughing, hugging strangers. Someone started chanting, "Kiss! Kiss, kiss!" But David shook his head. This wasn't about romance, he said to the crowd. This was about remembering that music has the power to heal, to open hearts, to bring out the best in all of us. He turned back to Isabella. The challenge is over. You kept your word. You listened with an open heart and you let yourself feel. Isabella wiped her eyes and looked at this remarkable man who had just changed her life with a song. What happens now? No, David said. You decide what kind of person you want to be. The music showed you who you really are underneath. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with excitement and emotion, Isabella stood in the middle of Washington Square Park, feeling like she was seeing the world clearly for the first time. The challenge was over. She had lost the bet according to the original terms, but somehow she felt like she had won something much more valuable than any game. She had won herself back. Part 5. Transformation and Resolution. 6 months later, Isabella stood in front of the mirror in her penthouse apartment, but she barely recognized the person looking back at her. She still had the same face, the same dark hair, the same expensive clothes, but something fundamental had changed. Her eyes looked different, softer, more alive, like someone who had remembered how to smile with her whole heart. The month since David's performance had been the most challenging and rewarding of her life. The immediate aftermath of that Thursday night had been chaos. The video of Isabella crying in Washington Square Park had been viewed over 200 million times. Every major news outlet wanted an interview. Late-night comedy shows were making jokes about the billionaire who found her heart. Social media was split between people calling her genuine and others claiming the whole thing had been a publicity stunt. Isabella had disappeared from public view for 2 weeks, ignoring her publicist's frantic calls and refusing all interview requests. She needed time to think, to process what had happened to her, to figure out who she wanted to be now that the walls around her heart had come down. When she finally emerged, she shocked everyone by announcing the creation of the Romano Foundation for Arts Education. Music changed my life, she had said at the press conference, standing in front of reporters who were expecting some kind of celebrity meltdown story. I want to make sure every child has access to that same transformative power, regardless of their family's income. The foundation started with a $50 million donation from Isabella's personal fortune. It funded music programs in public schools, provided free instruments and lessons to underprivileged children, and supported young musicians like David, who were trying to make a living through their art. But Isabella didn't just write a check and walk away. She showed up. She visited schools, listened to children play their first songs, attended recitals where proud parents cried watching their kids perform. She discovered that giving her money away felt infinitely better than accumulating it had ever felt. Miss Romano, thank you so much for the violin. 8-year-old Sophia had told her at one school visit. I'm going to practice every day and become a musician like David. Isabella had knelt down to Sophia's level. Call me Isabella, and I believe you will become an amazing musician. The world needs more beautiful music. Her business hadn't suffered from her new priorities. In fact, Romano hotels were doing better than ever. Isabella had discovered that when she started treating her employees like human beings instead of just resources, they worked harder and with more creativity. When she began donating a portion of profits to local communities, customers responded with increased loyalty. It turns out, she told her board of directors, that being a good person is actually good for business. Who knew? But the biggest change in Isabella's life had nothing to do with business or charity work. It was personal. She had reached out to David 2 weeks after the performance, not because she felt obligated by their original agreement, but because she genuinely wanted to thank him. They had met for coffee, the same small cafe where they had talked before, and for the first time in her life, Isabella had a conversation with a man who wasn't trying to impress her, use her, or win something from her. How did you know? She had asked him. How did you know exactly what song would reach me? David had stirred his coffee thoughtfully. I didn't know. I just listened. Over the past month, watching you at my performances, I could see the real person underneath all that armor. The music wasn't about making you cry. It was about helping you remember who you really are. They had started meeting regularly after that. Coffee dates turned into long walks through the city. Isabella showed David her world, the charity galas and business meetings, while he continued to show her the street corners and subway stations where music brought joy to ordinary people's lives. Slowly, carefully, something beautiful began to grow between them. It wasn't the fairy tale romance that social media wanted it to be. There were no dramatic proposals or celebrity wedding announcements. Instead, it was something deeper and more real, a genuine partnership between two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for. David helped Isabella remember how to feel, how to care about things beyond her own success. Isabella helped David dream bigger, showing him that his music could reach far more people than just subway commuters. Together, they created the Young Musicians Mentorship Program, pairing established artists with talented kids who needed guidance and support. David became the program's director, finally able to use his gifts to help others on a scale he had never imagined possible. "You know what's funny?" Isabella said to him one evening as they walked through Central Park. "A year ago, I thought success meant having everything I wanted. Now I realize it means wanting everything I have." David smiled and took her hand. "That sounds like something a very wise person would say." "I learned it from a street musician," Isabella replied. The media eventually got tired of their story and moved on to other drama. The internet found new videos to obsess over. Life returned to a more normal pace, which suited both Isabella and David perfectly. Isabella's relationship with her old friends had been more complicated. Monica and Rachel couldn't understand the changes in her personality. They missed the gossip, the shopping sprees, the casual cruelty that had once entertained them. "You've become so serious," Monica complained during one lunch that Isabella had agreed to out of old loyalty. "You used to be fun. Now all you talk about is charity work and music programs." "Maybe I was never actually fun," Isabella had replied gently. "Maybe I was just mean and you confused that with entertainment." Some of her old friends drifted away, unable to connect with this new version of Isabella. But new friendships took their place. Relationships with people who valued kindness over wealth, depth over surface-level amusement. Her mother had been thrilled with the changes. Finally, she had said during one of their video calls, "I see my daughter again. Not the business machine you became, but the sweet girl who used to sing lullabies to her dolls." "I remember that lullaby now, Mama," Isabella had said. "David played it for me. I don't know how he knew it, but somehow he did." "Music has a way of finding what we've lost," her mother had replied. "That young man has a gift for seeing people's hearts." Now, 6 months after that life-changing night in Washington Square Park, Isabella was getting ready for another performance. But this time, it was different. Tonight was the Romano Foundation's first annual benefit concert. David would be performing, along with dozens of young musicians that their programs had supported. The concert was sold out, with proceeds going to expand their work to more cities. But the most important part of the evening wouldn't be the performance. During intermission, Isabella planned to do something that would have been unthinkable to the old version of herself. She was going to propose to David. Not because of some silly bet or challenge, but because she had fallen deeply, completely, genuinely in love with the man who had helped her find her way back to herself. The ring was simple, not the massive diamond that old Isabella would have chosen, but an antique piece with a small stone that had belonged to David's grandmother. She had asked his permission to buy it from his family, explaining that she wanted something with meaning rather than just monetary value. "Are you nervous?" her assistant asked as Isabella put on her earrings. "Terrified," Isabella admitted. "But it's a good kind of terrified. The kind that means something important is about to happen." "What if he says no?" Isabella smiled. "Then I'll still be grateful for everything he's taught me. 6 months ago, I didn't even know how to love myself. Now I know how to love someone else completely. That's worth the risk." The concert was magical. Isabella sat in the front row, watching David conduct an orchestra made up entirely of young people who had been given their first instruments through the Foundation's programs. Their faces glowed with joy and pride as they played. During David's solo performance, he played "The Heart Remembers," the song that had changed everything. Isabella listened with tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than recognition. At intermission, instead of the usual fundraising speech, Isabella asked David to join her on stage. 6 months ago, she told the audience, this man taught me something I thought I had forgotten. He reminded me that music has the power to heal, to transform, to help us become the best versions of ourselves. She turned to David, who was looking at her with curiosity and growing surprise. "David Chen," she said, pulling out the ring box. "You made me remember what it feels like to be human. You showed me that love isn't about winning or losing, but about becoming better people together. Will you marry me?" The audience gasped. David stared at her for a long moment, his eyes filling with tears. "Isabella Romano," he said finally. "6 months ago you challenged me to make you cry. Tonight you're making me cry. And yes, I will absolutely marry you." The audience erupted in cheers as Isabella slipped the ring onto David's finger. They kissed while hundreds of people applauded, but Isabella barely heard the noise. All she could hear was the sound of her own heart, finally beating in rhythm with someone else's.